Uh, Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this evening's public lecture. My name is Naomi. I'm part of the organizing team for the Youth Initiative program, which is based here on this campus. For those of you who don't know YIP, YIP is a holistic education program for young people aiming to strengthen their capacity to take personal and collective initiative in the face of a complex and uncertain world. We aim to support young people to find their authentic task in service to a larger whole. This evening we're really honored to be joined by Vandana, who is here with us this week, speaking about biodiversity, food sovereignty, and regeneration. I would like to thank the Kulturhuset and Martin and Peter for their support in hosting this event, and also to Ekobanken, the local ethical bank here, and the Green Party for their generous support in enabling us to host Vandana here this week. At YIP we invite contributors from all different walks of life who are really pioneers in their field, but also hold a larger view of the whole. Vandana is a philosopher, activist, physicist, and advocate for food and seed sovereignty, and the founder of Navdanya Biodiversity Farm in India. She really holds a deep love and fierce protection for and defendant of Mother Earth. Vandana works out of the understanding that the world is an interconnected living organism in which every part has a role and an influence on the whole. And at the moment her work is very centered around seeds. Seeds are an eternal symbol of potential, and what grows from a seed is kind of a miraculous expression of what we call environment, ecology, soil. What do we do when we impose homogenization and control on that expression? And what if instead we work to embrace life's response to uncertainty, diversity of food, seeds, culture, and all living beings? It's really an honor to have you here with us today, Vandana, and thank you for agreeing to do this public lecture. I hand it to you.
Thank you. And it's wonderful to be back here. And work with the wonderful youth who join the Youth Initiative. It's also wonderful to see the local community that's present. And I will definitely share with you my understanding of both the fact that the web of life is woven by biodiversity. And biodiversity is the very basis of every ecological process on this planet. And what I've understood over these many years, as you heard, agriculture was not my field of study. I was thrown into it because of the disasters that were taking place. The disaster of Punjab, the land where the first Green Revolution was introduced. And they were protesting then, and they're protesting today. They've been tear-gassed on the borders of Delhi. 2 years ago, they sat on the streets outside Delhi for 14 months for justice. And they're back again for the same issues. And without a blink of an eyelid, the government gives this concession to this industry and this concession to this industry, the tiny bits of money that are needed to guarantee a fair price to farmers. They say, we don't have the money. There's always shortage of money for the things that need to be done, and limitless money for everything that doesn't need to be done. We don't need subsidies for chemical fertilizers. But that's where most of the money in agriculture goes. And so the food issue and the food sovereignty issue is deeply connected to biodiversity. And without living systems, there will be no regeneration. Regeneration means that which is generative can regenerate. Seed which regenerates gets a chance to renew itself, to become seed again, rather than be interrupted in that renewal of life. But I want to begin today, before I go into what I've learned over these 40 years, because I started the work on agriculture, thinking it would just be a study and I'd move on. But I couldn't move on because what was at stake? And this was in 1984. It's not just the title of a brilliant book, but it's what made me shift. Both because of the Punjab disaster and because of the disaster in the city of Bhopal when a pesticide plant leaked. And those two issues forced me to look at why was agriculture so violent? Where had these chemicals come from? And I realized they'd come from Hitler's Germany with the finance and the fossil fuels supplied by Rockefeller and Standard Oil. There actually used to be a company in that time called IG Farben Standard Oil. One company. IG Farben was the complex of German companies that were making the gases to kill people in concentration camps. And they were the ones who were tried at Nuremberg. But for some reason, Standard Oil was never tried because the jury was the Americans themselves. I've just read Steiner's agriculture lectures because I was asked to do a foreword to the French edition of these lectures. So I want to share with you some of the issues that resonate so much with my own thinking, because we have become used to thinking, oh, the Swedes are Swedes, Indians are Indians. Biodynamic is biodynamic, organic is there. You know, we're always thinking of the difference, very rarely about the commonalities. And ecological principles are the same. Different people put them into practice with different highlights. But it doesn't make the principles disappear. So the key principles, of course, Steiner was raising was living systems have integrity. That which has integrity and has to be protected is what we have traditionally defined as the sacred. That which you don't destroy. And I didn't grow up with that worldview, but when I started to save seeds, I had to go to communities. And then I learned from the communities, the traditional seeds they treat as sacred. The hybrids and the GMOs, they don't. They recognize they're contaminated. But even in animals, the indigenous breeds, they have ceremonies for them. For the crossbred cow, nothing. They understand that this introduced, manipulated seed or animal has lost its quality of integrity. And they use it because that's the only thing now available. So the earth is sacred. She's Gaia, she's Pachamama, she's Vasundhara in our language. We have a beautiful, you know, in India, ancient learnings were all in poetry. So if you read the Rig Veda, it's all poetry. And we have a book, not a book actually, it's the prayer. It's prayer to Mother Earth. And its name is the 1,000 names of the one who plays. Lalita is one of the names of the earth, the one who plays. And Sehasranam means 1,000 names. Because she comes with so many forms. She comes with so much creativity. Play is really the play of creation. The seed for sure is sacred and the soil is sacred. Show me an ancient culture that did not see the soil as sacred, that did not see human law as flowing from the law of the soil, the law of the land. Talk to indigenous people of Australia. What's your law? The law is the land. The land tells us what to do and what not to do. Go to the Andean people with Pachamama, they'll tell you the same. But we kind of turned our back to the land. And in the process, not only did we forget we are part of the earth, we started to have the arrogance that we are superior to all beings of the earth. And that the earth is inert and dead. I mean, so much of my own work has been challenging very violent technologies that flow from the assumption that the earth is inert matter and raw material. And you can manipulate it and own it. In the process, we've been reduced to consumers. We've been made to forget being part of the earth, we are part of the creativity. And we can be creative rather than destructive. We've been made to forget our full being, that we are biological beings. We do programs with schools, largely on food and health and stopping junk food, which is becoming such an epidemic. 15 years ago, we did a study. 7% of the kids in schools in Delhi were obese. We updated it 25% in 10 years. Because of metabolic disorder. So we've forgotten we are biological beings. And I asked the children, I said, so what is food? Food is fuel that runs our body, which is a machine. Because that's what the textbooks teach them. And they repeat it. We've forgotten we are part of the earth, therefore we are ecological beings. We are earth beings. We are interbeings. Because we are not separate. We are shaped by the soil. Old knowledge, old grandmothers used to say, you are what you eat. And in our language, there's a very lovely phrase. Jaisa anna, which is food, vaisa man. Your mind is shaped by what you eat. And when I started the work on seeds, and I'd go to the villages and I talked to the grandmothers would always say, the kids don't know values anymore because they're eating contaminated food. They have no idea anymore what's right and wrong, what's good and bad. And as interbeings, the soil and its biodiversity is what nourishes our gut microbiome and the biodiversity in the gut. 100 trillion beings. 100 trillion. We are only 10% human. The rest is other beings who are playing a core role in whether we are sick or healthy, we are depressed or happy. Because now not only is the soil and gut connection being established, but the gut and brain connection is being so hugely researched. And the gut and disease connection. So now the medical community that's thinking, that's not working for Big Pharma, is realizing that actually all the new chronic diseases that are spreading in society, that come from an industrial food system, they're actually just different systems of the same disease. And the same disease is a metabolic disorder. That the metabolism of our body is being disrupted. And so, whether it's diabetes or blood pressure or heart problems or high blood pressure problems, they're all interconnected. And they're connected to the diseases of the gut. We're interbeings, and of course, because we are part of an amazingly sacred universe, we are spiritual beings. Because we are connected to everything else, we are an earth family. We are not atoms in a fragmented society. Not only are we connected to each other, we are connected to every being in the earth. And the idea, the mechanistic philosophy that makes us think that the world is a machine is so false. Seed is not a machine, yeah? Since 1987, where I was at a meeting where the corporations basically said we'll own all the seed through patents, through genetic engineering. And we will establish the ontology of the seed as a machine we have invented. I said, no, you will not. Seed is the ultimate expression of a living earth. The multiplicity of the seeds has evolved with the diversity of plants, of cultures. In India, our peasants evolved 200,000 rice varieties. Just think, from wild grass, produced 200,000 rice varieties. The peasants of Mexico, and I'll be going in a few weeks to Mexico to support the government, which is refusing to accept GMOs. And there's a trade war taking place between the United States and Mexico. And Mexico is arguing that we are the people of corn. And our culture is not subject to your trade. It has integrity. We will defend our culture of corn. So we'll be there middle of March, with supporting the government, bringing people together from around the world who are, on the one hand, protecting their diversity, and on the other hand, resisting GMOs with all their false narratives. If you go to the Navdanya International website, you will find a declaration on defense of our seed and food freedom and a resistance to food imperialism. Because we see this as the new imperialism. The forcing of GMOs, which have already failed in 30 years, on countries, against the real science of living systems and self-organization. And agriculture, from my understanding, is the culture of the land, culture of the care for the land. And I met some of you who are farmers. In my world view, taking care of the earth is the highest vocation you can have. Might not be bringing enough incomes to the farmers, but that's not because its value is less. That's because we've created a hugely destructive, exploitative structure that rewards those who colonize, exploit, manipulate, and punishes those who care for the earth, who protect the biodiversity. And what I've learned in these 40 years is food is not a commodity. Food is not even the stuff. It's not the material you put on a weighing machine. Food is the currency of life. And as the currency of life, it is what maintains the planetary systems. Basic ecological cycle is the nutrition cycle. It's the food cycle. You disrupt it, you're going to get all kinds of havoc. But food is also the currency in terms of maintaining our health, our communities. And our health is connected to the health of the planet. It is in forgetting the sacred foundations of agriculture that the earth and our health has been degraded. That's why we need regeneration. We've become skilled in degeneration. Degenerating the land and desertifying it. Degenerating our food. Degenerating our society. For all the protests that farmers are doing, all they are asking is, we want to farm. We want to grow food. And they can see that there's a plan for extinction for farmers. And that's what they're resisting everywhere. And because we are connected to the earth, every harm we do to the earth becomes a harm to ourselves. And food is the connector. Food is what we grow when we work with the earth. Food is what the earth gives back to us. And we've had such a strange view of looking at the world. Our view of looking at the world is as outsiders. We're not part of the web of life. We're outsiders, and we are here to conquer and own, not to participate in the earth's processes. But the other element of the strange thinking is not only are we outsiders, we are masters. We are masters of the universe. And the early literature, if you read it, is all about building empires of man over lesser creatures and lesser cultures. At one level, that's still going on. It's just that it's now being done through the seeds we need, through the food we eat. And food is not just being alienated from the land and the soil, it's being alienated from the way our bodies work. That's why we have a chronic disease epidemic. So in his lecture, Steiner said, agriculture springs from the earth. Soil is living, soil is sacred. 3 basic principles to get our foods and farming systems right. Because the sacred encourages us to have reverence. And reverence is the way to protect. And treating reverence as an impediment to man's empire is the root of all the destruction we see around us. Human life is a microcosm which imitates the macrocosm. And according to Steiner, anything we can do artificially is a poor second to the fertility the earth herself can provide. Humus formation occurs when something derived from plant life is incorporated into the general processes of nature. And the totally false view, he says, of how living things are nourished, that fertility can be introduced by chemicals that are produced from fossil fuels that have their original purpose as explosives. That is what's going to bring life to the soil and fertility to the soil. And I remember when I did my first study on agriculture called The Violence of the Green Revolution, I read every textbook that's taught in agriculture, in industrial agriculture. To understand where was this violence coming from. And you read the literature of what people are in conventional agriculture and industrial farming are taught, soil is an empty container for putting nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, artificial fertilizer into it. That's all. That's all its purpose is. It's not living. But whether you read Albert Howard or you read Steiner, they're constantly talking about the soil as living. And therefore, fertilizing is what the soil does for itself, its self-organized fertility. And the renewal that we play is by working with what the earth gives us, plant life, organic matter. We don't go to fossil fuels. And I've just done I'm doing my new book on climate change and the future of food. And this data surprised even me when I know nitrogen fertilizers they don't just destroy the soil. In my early days when I used to teach farmers, I'd take an earthworm and sprinkle a little bit of urea on it. And they could see it's about to die. And then of course I'd save it. And they say, oh my God, this is what we are doing? And before this they do, we have all these rituals and the Havan and they're talking the Shanti part. May there peace of the earth and peace of the skies and peace. And I said, this is what you're doing with your chemical farming. And so many of them shifted because you can't see what you're doing to the soil. It's all happening underground beyond your sight. So I knew it was killing the soil. I know most of the fertilizer is wasted, only about 10% is really used. And the runoff is what's creating dead zones. Just look at the areas that are increasing as dead zones in the ocean. And then the atmosphere, in an interesting way, nobody talks about fertilizers and the nitrogen problem. They talk about cows and the nitrogen problem, but they don't talk about fertilizer. Nitrous oxide that is emitted from synthetic fertilizers is 300 times more damaging to the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. But there's silence about it. Because the same groups have investments in fertilizers. And according to the International Energy Agency, oil use as a petrochemical feedstock is the only area where use of fossil fuels is actually increasing. Fertilizer industry. And they keep talking about getting rid of fossil fuels. But where it matters, they're not. It's increasing. And in the 2019 report of the IPCC, nitrogen production has increased 9-fold since 1961, reaching a staggering amount of 123 million tons in 2020. And fossil fertilizers contribute, I call synthetic fertilizers disguised fossil fuels, because everyone's hyper about fossil fuels. But they don't ever talk about the use of fossil fuel in the fertilizer industry. There's amazing silence about it. So fossil fuel fertilizers contribute to a greenhouse gas that not only, it's 3,000 times more, but it is the emissions from the full life cycle of production of synthetic fertilizers is more than all the emissions from commercial flights. It's more than 1.2 billion tons. But because so much of how a problem is defined and what the solutions are offered are so connected to where money can be given rather than what's the right thing for the earth, we're getting a huge attack of false solutions on the climate front. And I've just added together, the industrial model of food and farming has contributed to 50% of the greenhouse gases. It has contributed to 75% destruction of soil and water. It has contributed to about 90% of biodiversity erosion, and it has contributed to 75% of chronic disease. All of these are connected. The chronic diseases that are impacting us are the root of the climate havoc that's impacting the earth and us, and it's all connected to the biodiversity that's being lost. Because we forget that biodiversity and the biosphere is the regulator of the climate system and the atmosphere. Just think of it. Over 4 billion years, the earth, through photosynthesis by microbes and plants, the earth reduced her temperature from 290 degrees centigrade to 13 degrees centigrade. It's now come to 40. She took the concentration of carbon dioxide from 98% of the atmosphere to 0.03% through her capacity, and reduced the parts per million, 4,000 parts per million to 250, which is now becoming higher. But, photosynthesis as the regulator of the climate, plants as a regulator, and also the providers of food at the same time. This is the key. The other day, someone sent me an interview with Bill Gates, who says he's the biggest solver of the climate problem. And in this particular interview, the journalist, I think he's a New York Times journalist, he's saying a lot of people suggest that planting trees, they don't talk about intensifying biodiversity in agriculture. Some people talk about planting trees being a good way to sequester carbon. And he turns around and says, those are idiots. We are the science people. So what do the science people do? Science people bombard the atmosphere with aerosols, projects that Gates was pushing with the Harvard University in the Sami areas to block the sun. And so many Nobel Prize winners are in this geoengineering issue. And I just asked them two things. I said, since when did the sun, which is the basis of life on Earth, become a problem? How do you think blocking the sun is a huge innovation? And the second thing I say is, look, if you've lost the sun, what's going to happen to our food security? After all, the sun is what provides the energy for the plant and the green leaf of the plant to carry out the photosynthesis. So you're going to be blocking photosynthesis. Oh, no, I'm just looking at temperature. I'm not looking at life on Earth. How can you be addressing a problem about life on Earth without looking at life on Earth? And that's part of the myopia and reductionism that's guiding so much. But there's huge money. Because they worked out how many, they'll have to perpetually spray pollution in the atmosphere. They'll make money. And the reason they push all this, at the end of it, it all runs with our public money. Instead of going for the social good, goes for the private super profits to destroy the earth further. I mean, you should just look at the budgets they're creating. And of course, they're solving climate problem. So the issue of fossil fuels, which everyone's awake to, hasn't yet brought the thinking to fossil agriculture. And I know part of it is people don't know, because, I'm a physicist. But when I work with ecology, my mind is open enough to know how living systems work. You don't carry a mechanistic physics into the domain of life. And, in fact, two people who contributed, Schrödinger as a quantum physicist, and Giorgio Rogen. He did a book on entropy. Schrödinger did a little book on what is life. And in that he says, life does not work with external energy. Life works with the energy it generates itself. When the seed becomes a plant, it's using its own energy. And he says the miracle about living systems is they have negative entropy. Now, entropy is the wasted energy that's created in any mechanical industrial system, because they work with external inputs of energy, and in the process they create waste. And wasted energy is entropy. But when a plant grows and is performing photosynthesis, it's actually generating new energy. It's absorbing whatever it's creating for the next level of growth. And to have the alternative of negative entropy living systems, and to not use that power of the living system, is is actually not innovation. It's not brilliance. It's actually having a blind eye. You know, Rachel Carson had talked about the introduction of chemicals in agriculture in a book, Silent Spring. He says, the control of nature is a phrase conceived in arrogance, born of the Neanderthal age of biology and philosophy, when it was supposed that, that nature exists for the convenience of man. And that is the anthropocentric thinking, that we are at the center. That's why I've never accepted the term Anthropocene. I don't accept it for two reasons. That no matter how destructive our impact, the self-organizing capacity of Gaia is always much, much, much higher. And the second reason I don't accept Anthropocene is because not all human beings are contributing to this destruction. They too are victims. The people in my land. 30,000 were killed in 1999 with a super cyclone we've never had before. 20,000 were washed away in 2013. And 2 years ago, another glacier melted, and then there was a flooding, and they were building dams, and the workers inside the dam tunnel were killed. This is like every second day you get these stories. And they aren't to blame for the disaster they're facing. You know, some people have called it not the Anthropocene, but the Capitalocene, the greed economy. That is what is causing both the climate disaster and then is offering false solutions. Because the soil and the plants and the planet is one interconnected, indivisible whole, regeneration is working with living systems that are generative and regenerate. It's giving up the anthropocentric arrogance and working in humility. You know, the word humus is also at the root of the word human. And it's at the root of the word humility. Because the soil reminds us. We are shaped by the soil. There's an ancient Veda which says, in this handful of soil is your future. Take care of it, it will take care of you. Destroy it, it will destroy you. And one can say that for every aspect. And even though the word regeneration, I'll give you a history of the word regeneration in agriculture. So, you know, just like the biodynamic movement is being hugely attacked, the organic movement was attacked. First they attacked the organic movement, then they came to the biodynamic. A part of it is they're really successful. You know, they do lead to good farming, and the market in these products is exploding because people want healthy food. And industry can't tolerate that. So it's using its old Baconian attack that this is not science, this is not science. So we decided, 4 of us got together and said, you know, we should continue to use the word organic, but now put a prefix, regenerative organic. Because a lot of big organic has become totally commodified. You know, like Whole Foods has been bought up by the Amazon guy, what's his name? Yes. It's owned by Jeff Bezos now. So given that that's the way a lot of it is going, let's distinguish ourselves. Not realizing they'd co-opt this one too. I mean, a few months ago I had to write a chapter for a book coming out of Germany on reclaiming regenerative. Because you go to Syngenta's website, go to Bayer's website, say, we are regenerative agriculture. And 3 paras later, they talk about how they spray pesticides. Yeah? So they're trying to co-opt the word. Steiner calls for regeneration through living relationships. We must have a personal relationship in all these things. Each plants possess the power of reproduction. Each individual species develops the ability to bring forth its own kind. And this, we must know this in intimacy. That's why small farms are imperative. He invites us to regenerate inner liveliness. I love this phrase. Inner liveliness of seeds, plants, the soil, and the entire farm. When we approach everything in farming with the conviction that in order for the whole thing to work, we need to pour life and astrality into everything around us. That's our action of care, pouring life. We have the potential to shift from a degenerative system to a regenerative system. And of course, because this is not just an ecological phenomena, it's also an economic phenomena. Because all the poverty of farmers, all the dispossession of farmers is linked to the dependence on external inputs. Their debt is related to it. Their inability to pay the mortgage is the single biggest reason for disappearance of family farms. I was just reading that in the last decade, 3 million family farms have disappeared in Europe. You know, I remember when I used to come earlier, Sweden, Norway were all lands of family farms. So the exploitative system is turning farmers into consumers of unnecessary things. Poisons, fossil fuels. And Steiner says a farm comes closest to its own essence in the best sense of the word if it can be conceived of as a kind of individuality in its own right, a self-contained entity. Every farm must really aspire to be such a self-contained, every farm must really aspire to be such a self-contained individual. This means that within our farms, we should attempt to have everything we need for agricultural production, including, of course, the appropriate amount of livestock. You know, there's a war against the cow. 200,000 marked to be culled in Ireland for climate change. You know, the cow. 4 stomachs of the cow cause methane. Mr. Gates in his book on climate change. You look into your stomach, you have only 1. You look into a cow's stomach, it has 4. That's what creates methane. Trees absorb carbon dioxide. That's idiots. Building artificial carbon sequestering machines which will use more energy, use more materials, and at the end of it, no matter what they do, 2% will be pulled out. That's innovation. And the word innovation is derived from the word innovare. And the innovare means making new. So when I plant a seed and give me seed, the seed has innovated. So regeneration is innovation. But the current understanding of innovation is destroy that which exists. Deny nature. And from there, create markets for everything that makes life run. Most importantly, we've seen the market for seeds, a totally destructive market for creating, GMOs, patents. And Steiner talks about everything that has gone wrong because we have forgotten how to care for nature. And unless we learn again to care for nature, we will never be able to set everything that's gone wrong right. So the issue of biodiversity and the issue of the human future and the issue of life on Earth are deeply connected. Now, biodiversity was driven out by a worldview that saw diversity as an obstruction and redefined measures of productivity, of efficiency, on the basis of extractivism, you know? So a forest with diversity is not a productive system. When you replace it with a plantation of a commercial species, now it becomes productive, because then you have all the pulpwood to exploit. In a similar way, an agricultural field with rich diversity, Navdanya, practices diversity. The word Navdanya means 9 seeds. Our work is showing that not only is the diversity in the farm more resilient to climate havoc, but more importantly, you know, when I watched the impoverished monoculture fields of Punjab, I said, this is very unproductive, because I was looking at the biological productivity. But the productivity that's measured in industrial farming, you know, it's always a ratio, output per unit input. The only input they calculate is human labor. You can increase your fossil fuel use 500 times. You get rid of the farmers, it's more productive agriculture. And in fact, in the early policy making days, in the US, the documents from the agriculture secretary would say, we've got to squeeze the farmer off the land like we squeeze the toothpaste out of the toothpaste tube. So the industrial agriculture's idea has always been to squeeze the farmer off the land, because the farmer is an independent being. And a system of control doesn't want any independent production. They began with synthetic fertilizers, and as Steiner says, anything artificial is inferior, and sure enough, compared to all kinds of composting. Look at the fertilizer, and you know, we've been, for the 20, 30 years, we've been measuring data. I'll just show you. So in our valley, we did a 20-year study comparing organic soils and chemical soils. And the carbon content in chemical soils had gone down by 14%. It had gone up by 99% in the organic soils. Nitrogen had gone down by 22% in the chemical soils, where you're putting urea for more nitrogen. The nitrogen in the soil is going down. Nitrogen in the soil went up for 100% because the organisms were providing it. Zinc, 38% less, and 14% more in organic farm. And zinc increasingly is not just being identified as a key nutrient for loss of immunity. But a doctor friend visited from Australia, and she saw this data. And she says, now I understand why 50% of Australia's kids are depressed. Because, you know, she treats people by doing brain chemistry. And she knows what's less. And she knew all these depressed kids had deficiency of zinc. I said, now I can see where it's coming from. The entire food system is degraded and degenerated. Magnesium, 17%, 14%. So we're depleting the soil, and then we're depleting our food. Because when the soil doesn't have the nutrients, your food won't have it. And that's what then leading to all kinds of new diseases. Even the seed, you know, if the soil was called an empty container, and synthetic fertilizers were supposed to improve fertility, then the seed was defined as an empty container. And when I say this, you know, these are issues which I've had to debate with the Monsantos of the world in the Supreme Court of India. This is, seed is an empty container, it's what we put into it that brings it life. Seed has no life. And the whole idea of patenting seed and the need for do genetic engineering is linked to this. The real thing is they want to own the seed through patents. To get the patents, they have to pretend they'd made something new. Therefore, they have to pretend seed is a machine, not a self-organized, evolving system. And in the process, they deny all the creativity of nature and biodiversity and appropriate the creativity that's in the seed and evolved by the farmer as their creativity. So often there's been patents taken on what we've evolved. There was a patent taken on neem, a wonderful pest control plant. I fought that case 11 years. They took a patent on our ancient wheat, which doesn't, I notice in the dining room, there always is a label of gluten-free. But the gluten is not in the wheat. The gluten is in the way you've bred it for uniformity and for increase in gluten content for industrial processing. But ancient wheats don't express gluten because you don't need to. And ancient wheats with diversity don't give you gluten intolerance. And this is what Monsanto had patented, an ancient Indian wheat for the market of gluten intolerance. We fought that case. I come from Dehradun, where our aromatic rice, the basmati, is famous. Of course, very often when you see the label Dehraduni basmati, it won't be coming from Dehradun. We have very few agricultural fields left. And, we work with about 400 basmati farmers, and we barely manage to meet our own needs. The basmati was patented by an American company. So you take what exists in nature and in cultures and say, I invented it. Just like the discovery, Columbus's thesis of discovery. Columbus discovered America, therefore England can own North America. And the Spanish and Portuguese can own something. So like land was discovered, now seed is being discovered. But life is intelligence. Life is self-organized creativity and interconnectedness. All beings have intelligence. Anthropocentrism denies that. And now, of course, we are at this threshold where we were anyway denied intelligence. But now they really want to take it away. So everything that's going on right now is, how do you download the left side of your brain with analytic functions into a computer, and then the computer, through algorithms, generates systems to manipulate your mind. And all the work going on right now about the Internet of Things, about you being connected to the cloud, they really are saying, we will be creating transhumans who are superior to human beings. But the transhuman will be in the computer and in the machine. Transhuman will not be a human being. I think we're talking about Steiner and talking about the sacred and spiritual. There's the fellow in Silicon Valley who talks about the sacred machine. And he's the one who actually brings Descartes back from the grave. For Descartes, Descartes said, I'm a thinking thing without a body. So it's a denial of our biological being. And that's where they want to take us. That, biology is problematic. Biology is real people who need food. They need healthcare. They need education. Just make them disappear in your worldview. I don't know how many of you have heard Zuckerberg's speech at Harvard, his convocation speech. He actually said, in a few years, 99% humanity will be useless. The World Economic Forum has an advisor called Yuval Harari, who says the future is most of humanity will be useless. He says, we do not need so many people. But who decides creation on the basis of your need? Who gave you that power? And he says this is fascinating. I mean, he talks very learned, but he's full of contradictions. Because on the one hand, he says it's an end of thinking about God, And then he wants to play God. So there are 3 or 4 of his speeches, always given at World Economic Forum and other places. He actually says, we do not need so many useless eaters. But you know, it's not just the humans who eat, every being eats. So you're already writing a recipe for extinction for all beings. And in another one, he says, we don't need people. But what do we do with them? All this extra baggage. And he says, this is where Zuckerberg's Meta comes into play. With a universal basic income, we'll give them these gadgets. And they will sit crippled, sick, diseased, hungry in a little corner. And in the metaverse, they are skiing in Sweden. Yeah? So that's the way we'll cope with this. So another use of this whole digital imperialism, one use is, of course, control. Another use is market, because Susanna Zuboff of the Harvard University wrote a very, very good book called Surveillance Capitalism. And in that, she's basically saying, we are the new raw material. So far, it's been iron ore, bauxite. Now we are the raw material. And what got mined from us is our data. But then it gets fed back to us through processing from algorithms for our control. And there are only 2 uses for the control. One is political. I mean, this happened with, with the elections in America in 2016, where Zuckerberg and Facebook sold the data of Facebook to a company called Cambridge Analytica in England. And Cambridge Analytica picked 4 hates from those Facebook communications. And then they created a list of those who hate women, hate blacks, hate immigrants, hate Muslims. And then they fed it back in aggravated form through campaign messages. And so by the end of it, you had more hate for women, you had more hate for blacks, you had more hate for immigrants, and you had more hate for the Muslim people. And you can see that that's actually working. These algorithm-driven messaging is working to polarize society. And instead of the currency of love growing, the currency of hate is being manufactured. So you can manipulate people politically, but you can also pester them into buying things you don't need. I don't use all this. I don't use Facebook. People have created, I was told I have about 10 Facebook accounts. I've never created them. Others have created it. Yeah. But the most important part of this is, my friends have told me, if they sent a message to a friend to say, I bought a blue dress today, then out of the blue dresses keep popping up in advertisements in your computer. Yeah? And I was told by another young friend of mine who says the highest paid jobs in the digital world are those who give prompt messages, who are basically facilitating the manipulation of the media. So we too are being turned into raw material, like the world has been turned into raw material. And how do we stay free? First, we have to realize that when the synthetic fertilizers were sold to farmers, not only were subsidies given, so it became, for them, a profitable venture. But because I'd done this work in India, I would go to the farmers and say, why did you start buying chemical fertilizers? And they said there were conditionalities. We couldn't borrow from the bank unless we could show that we bought fertilizer. So it was introduced through conditionality. GMO seeds is the same. I asked the American farmers who first adopted GMO soya, and I said, why are you using this? You know, you work with me. We're working for an agriculture that's good for the earth and good for farmers and good for people. And he said, and this is a progressive farmer, he says, the corporations have a noose around our neck. We cannot do a thing without collaborating with them. Because if we don't buy their seed, then the Cargills won't buy our product. The specifications are made so restrictive to this total dependency. And the staying free today is really about an interconnected freedom. In any case, we were not atoms. An atomistic democracy and atomistic freedom was always a fiction. We can only be as free as all the beings we are related to are free. And the first freedom now is the freedom to exist, to avoid extinction. The second aspect of our freedom is interconnected to the freedom of all other human beings. You know, if there's one part that's being enslaved, then we are all enslaved. And the arrogance that, oh, it's not happening to me, we should remember that powerful poem by a priest during Hitler's time. He said, first they came for the Jews. I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the workers. Then they came for the Catholics. And it runs through everyone who was picked up and put in concentration camps. He said, then they came for me, and there was no one to stand for me. Because violence is interconnected, and non-violence is interconnected. The violence to the earth and the violence to human beings is one violence. But a relationship of making peace with the earth is not only making peace with other human beings and letting them have their share. Gandhi had used a very, very powerful phrase, which is a distillation of an ancient Upanishad. He has said, the earth has enough for everyone's needs, but not for a few people's greed. You need 3 billionaires to create scarcity. You need one BlackRock, one Vanguard, for everyone to run out of things. I mean, it breaks my heart to see the country that was the richest country. Large numbers on the streets, in Oakland, in Los Angeles. You just throw away people. And that's because, from what I read recently, half of the private houses in America have been bought out by BlackRock. And I studied in Canada, and there was nothing like homelessness. And there was no crime. We used to leave our doors open. Because if everyone has everything, why would they steal? And now we've started seeing this, and the day I read this news, on the one side was the news that because of all these new policies, large numbers are going on the street and living in tents. And the police had been unleashed on them to remove them from the parks and whichever open spaces they were. And then they were offered an option. They wrote a law that you don't have a right to a home, you don't have a right to live on a park in a tent, but you have a right to end your life through suicide, through assisted suicide. Same day. If you're living in a park, it's illegal. You end your life. The government wants to facilitate it. So we're in this strange suicidal path. Ecologically, we're in the strange suicidal path of assisted suicide. But all of it because an artificial scarcity has been created. First, because of ecological degeneration, but second, because of greed. And on the other side is the option of creating abundance. Because nature creates abundance, biodiversity creates abundance. And our work in Vandana, because we actually measure, we grow plots of 12 crops and 9 crops and 7 crops, across the board, the higher the diversity in a farm, the more it produces. The higher the diversity in a piece of land, the more diversity it grows in the soil. The more food it provides us, and of a diverse nutrition kind. And even more importantly, this is where the climate problem gets solved. Because the more biodiversity you have, the more photosynthesis you have. Because, in diverse systems, farming is not linear, rows. Diverse systems, everything is working together. Every bit of the sunlight is being harvested for biological production. And it's now becoming so clear. They keep saying, there's no hope about the 1.5 degrees. There's no chance. There's nothing. There's no technology. They don't look at the technology of nature. They don't look at the technologies people have evolved through alternative systems. So the data is very clear. We have annual anthropogenic emissions are 24.88 gigatons. But if 10% of the farms went ecological, as biodynamic, as organic, as permaculture, we can pull down, the potential is 34.79 gigatons per year. We have the capacity to pull down more carbon dioxide while growing more food and healthy food. The only losers are the corporations. The earth benefits, farmers benefit, people benefit. And by intensifying biodiversity and photosynthesis, another calculation by another friend is, if 1% carbon is returned to the soil, only 1%, you pull out 31 gigatons, which is equivalent to the gap. Because everyone's now making voluntary commitments. Nobody, the climate treaty used to be about legally being forced to reduce emissions. And after Copenhagen, they just make commitments. But what I love is the little mycorrhizal fungi. You know how much it's holding? 1/3 of the emissions. So here we are in such a creative world of abundance. And we just need to grow life. And life will grow, because that's what it does. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. We now have a little bit of time for a few questions. I've got a microphone here and Annie has one here. If you want to take the microphone, please just hold it like this, not at the bottom or top. Yes.
No questions. We just grow life.
Hello. My name is Jan. Thank you for beautiful speech, and it's very clear on some of the external transformations that we need to make. My question is, what do you see needs to happen on the internal side in us humans? What is the human development or the shifts that people need to go through to be able to make those external transformations or shifts?
I think the first part of the shift is to realize that we are not machines. As I mentioned in the beginning, we are ecological beings, we are spiritual beings, and every action we take has to be informed by that. The second big shift we need to make is overcome disconnection and separation, because we've been made to feel separate. And when we realize we are connected, you see, because we've also divided the inside and outside, we often think that going inside means disconnecting from the outer world. I mean, I've been to strange conferences. America is a strange country, but the United States of America, not the continent. But sometimes they call me for a spiritual conference, and all they're doing is unbelievable. They're selling crystals and buying crystals. And for them, and they fill my country, because my country is, still there's a lot of spiritual traditions. They fill those ashrams for consumption. But to know we are spiritual beings is to know that the world itself is spiritual. And that's why the issue of sacred. Our spirituality has to be guided by the interconnectedness, not by separation. And what it starts to do then is, it starts to shrink our arrogance and the illusion of power. And it starts to shift to the sense of duty. That our work is not what you can control, what you can profit, what you can extract. Our work is to serve. Serve the earth, serve communities, serve people. And both from my own life's experience, as well as my scientific research, I'm realizing that actually the more you give, the more things grow. You give love to the soil will be more rich. You give love to a plant, the plant will flourish. You give love to a child, the child will be happy. There's so many neglected kids in the world these days because people are so busy making. When I did these programs with schools, we showed them this film called Super Size Me, which is about McDonald's selling these big doses to sell more. And this film really showed how this man got hugely obese in a few months of eating a pure McDonald's diet. And he did it because 2 girls who had become obese had sued McDonald's. And the judges said, where's the proof that a McDonald's diet gives obesity? So he said, I'll generate the proof. And he himself got very sick. So I was showing this film, and then we do these workshops, and I'd ask the group of young students, so what did you have for breakfast this morning? 80% put up their hands. I didn't have breakfast. Because my father and mother leave before I go to school. There's no breakfast. When I go to the school, I buy whatever's available, which is always junk food. And when I come back, my parents haven't come back from work yet. So the parents are working and work. Some are working because what they're earning is not covering enough. But most importantly, many are working. I remember years ago reading a Time magazine cover. DINK. It was an abbreviation for a new class of people in America. Double income, no kids. You're so busy making money, you don't have the time to have kids. Therefore, they've created a surrogacy industry in India. They can't spare the 9 months. It takes up too much loss of income. So they try to hire women's wombs in India. Huge controversies we've had over this. Wombs for rent. So I think a big part of it is we made money the currency of everything we do. And we've forgotten our own potential. So the inner growth is really about finding our potential of living in an interconnected world. The person who heads the church in England, I remember he was with me at a conference and he said something that's interesting. He said, the problem with spirituality is just forgotten the material. But care for the material world is part of spiritual practice. And knowing that the living world, that plant is sacred, the soil is, it's all sacred. So you're anyway connected through a deeper consciousness. And that's what the quantum thinking is about. That what connects the observer and what's observed is the fact that it's part of one consciousness.
Hey, Vandana. I got a question as well. Speaking about connection, and how do you spread this consciousness that you provided and presented today? Because I think in an effort to overcoming what's being laid out and maliciously laid out, it's about how we organize ourselves and spread the news, for alternatives that you were talking about today.
Well, I think the first is to not let the flame of the alternatives die. Because we're at that kind of moment. And the second is you've got to be totally alert to what are the new polarizations and divisions that are being created artificially in order to prevent us from organizing. Divide and rule has always been the policy of ruling. And if you just look back in the last 3 years, just think of the cracks that have been created in society. They didn't grow from society. They were planted into society. Read the minutes of the BlackRock meetings. This whole construction of this thing called ESG. And what's it? And he says it, this head of BlackRock said, we've got to force change in people's behavior, but not in terms of unity, but in terms of division. Have everyone fight everyone else. And reach out to those they're trying to divide you from. Otherwise, we'll never be able to organize. So I would say to anyone in Europe right now, reach out to any real farmer. Don't only look for the biodynamic. Don't only look for the organic. Look for anyone who's farming. Because anyone who's farming today has a commitment about the land. In my country, here, it's always about our land will be grabbed. Our land is being grabbed. They want to stay with Mother Earth. So recognize the divisions that are being created and don't allow them to play out in your life. Reach out. Create unpredictable alliances. We were comfortable over the last 30, 40 years. We could build alliances with those who did what we were doing or who were like us. Now you've got to build alliances with those who are not like us. And don't allow the fact that if someone is not to perfection in your worldview, they are untouchable. I know so many people who think, you can't talk to conventional farmers. You have to talk to conventional farmers. Because the only way we'll change the food system is by knowing we are all eaters. And therefore, no matter what kind of farmer is bringing you food, they're the ones connecting you to the soil. And then work with them to say, the same system that's making you grow poison food is getting into debt, is leading to a decline in your incomes. So shift into realizing that you care for the earth and you care for our health. Get your mindset out of the idea of being a cog in a production machine of a toxic agriculture. You're not a cog in the machine. You're healers. You're healers of the soil. You're healers of society, which is getting very sick. So there's a lot to do.
Yeah, I would like to continue that. There's a lot to do. You have been talking about farmers and financiers. And I would like to point out that the farmers are producing food, the financiers are the ones who create our money that we need to function in society. And the finance is created only by lending it out to the farmers or anybody else. And I feel to get this freedom back to really work and care in a society, we have to take back the creation of money to look after our society. And I understood that happened in India. 20 villages actually it was done as an experiment where every person got a basic income. And positive things really started to happen. And this, I see, is the challenge of our society, to not let, we see we can do everything practical on the land, try and go to organic, but we have to take hold of our society system. The lifeblood of society, as you said, is money. We have water in nature is running between us all. But how do we get back the power that we could use, that the money system will work for us all? Then I think farmers will get back their power. Thank you.
You know, so I'm drinking wonderful water that's at this campus. If this had been privatized by Nestle or by Coca-Cola, then I would need money. But as long as water is a commons and has not been polluted, I have water without money. But that applies to everything else. It's not that people didn't have ways of exchanging through money currency. I mean, when I was a child, you could go into an old town and you could deal with 30 kinds of coins. Leftovers from old regimes who had their own currencies, you know? And they were still in currency. And the big currency was this thing called the cowrie. You know the cowrie shell? Now, every indigenous culture, for some reason, has it. You know? So money was a mere means of exchange. Money got mutated into capital, which became a mysterious force of creation. And then during globalization, it was turned into finance. And when I was doing my work on globalization, I remember writing that 70% of the economy was now financial. I'm talking about 15 years ago. Because money could make money. I mean, what's Wall Street about? Algorithms make money. They have this thing of exchange by the second, digitally. You can just make money out of nothing. How come the financial giants have become the owners and controllers of the whole world? Do they create anything? They don't. Do they produce anything? They don't. So I think it is ontologically false to put money before life. Life comes first. Life comes first not only in every human being's life, but life also comes first in the way we organize. Now, you talked about 20 villages with an experiment. I have worked in and lived in hundreds of villages with no money. The ultimate clothing, they weave themselves, they don't need money. The best of food, they grow themselves without external inputs, don't need money. Build beautiful houses with wonderful carving. They don't have to buy anything because they have it all. They have the skills. I mean, these days, if a government says skill development, they never say the skill to make a home. They never talk about skill of farming. They only talk about learning how to code or work a computer. But that's not what gives you life. So the real currencies are in nature, and they come to us through our work with nature. And if you start to add up in a fictitious way, because I don't think you can really commodify nature. I have resisted privatization of water hugely. And I must say, every place where we have fought to say water is a common good, water is not a commodity to be traded, we have won against the biggest of giants, the Coca-Colas, the Nestles. But the real issue is that knowing what we receive from the earth and giving back to the earth in service is beyond the control of the market. These are the living economies that are going on all the time. In enough villages today, we work with them. This is the movement I've built through Navdanya, that we will not accept the GMOs and we will not accept the patenting of seed. We will keep seed in the commons. So we built community seed banks. If I go to seed in the community seed bank, I don't need money. When I multiply that seed, it has the power of multiplication because it is. Seed is renewable, seed is regenerative. There's a place I picked up 3 grains of wheat. We multiplied it. In a few years, because it creates so much abundance, in a few years, I gifted this ancient wheat in 2 tractors to the Punjab farmers who lost all their seed. So I think the basic question is ontology, and the basic question is economy as the art of living. I shared this with the YIP course today, that there are 2 systems. One is about living, including human beings living with each other, as producers, as co-creators. And the other is a system of money-making. And when you have the system of money-making, those who make the money will leave the rest impoverished. And as Audre Lorde said, you cannot bring down the master's house with the master's tools. To bring down the master's house, you have to turn to the earth for her tools and technologies, and you have to turn to your potential to work with the earth. And then if you add it all up, right now what's going on is resources are being appropriated and they're being financialized. And the financialization means that BlackRock comes to you and says, you have lovely water. And I'll invest this much in it. You know, all your empty buildings, they'll get filled up with, I'll have all the money, give you all the money for investment. And then they will gamble on that, on the water. But the water, the groundwater is limited. The water in the rivers is limited. Money cannot multiply it. Love and care can through conservation. You know, through water conservation, I can increase the available water in an ecosystem. 2 years ago, at the time of the Glasgow Summit in Climate, the corporations and Wall Street and all of these financiers announced natural asset corporations. They're going to have, like first they created the corporation 1600 East India Company. Now they want to create natural asset corporations. And they are talking about gambling on the real resources of the planet to make money out of money. So everywhere, biodiversity is shrinking, water is shrinking, soil is shrinking because of degeneration. And people have no money. And they are talking about a $4,000 trillion financial economy. But if you get confused ontologically and you think the growth of the financial economy is the growth of water, you're going to have real scarcity. So I really do feel that we need to keep different levels of ontology in the plane where they work and not make living systems dependent on a derived element. Money, finances are derived from living processes which nature creates and human beings create. And then they get multiplied by all kinds of processes. Money making money.
I think we're at time now, so thank you for your questions, and thank you, Vandana.
Thank you.
Once again.
All.